May I remind everyone that social distancing measures are in place in the chamber and across the campus, so please take particular care when you're entering and exiting the chamber. And the next item of business is a Green Party debate on motion 24029 in the name of Mark Ruskell on universal support for self-isolation. May I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Mark Ruskell to speak to and move the motion for up to 8 minutes, please, Mr Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to all of those who are working so hard to keep us safe during the pandemic, and not least those working in our frontline health and care services. The rollout of the vaccine in particular is a remarkable effort in every corner of these islands, and the daily vaccine numbers show that the race between the virus and the vaccine is starting to be won. But it would be a mistake to see that race as an endgame in a battle against a SARS virus that is constantly mutating and probing our weaknesses. As Professor Sridhar recently put it, the vaccine is not a strategy in itself, and relying on it alone is highly risky. A well-functioning test, trace and isolate system must form the foundation of our approach to dealing with this and future pandemics. And at a meeting of the COVID committee last week, the National Clinical Director stated, "It looks as though we will have to live with COVID in some form for years to come, probably with routine vaccination over time." Presiding Officer, if this is to be the case, then developing a strong self-isolation package now will serve us well into the future. But such a system will only be successful if people are actually isolating, and studies have consistently shown that many are struggling to. UK-wide research published by the University College London on 13th of January showed that 38% of respondents were not isolating for the recommended number of days, and 13% were not isolating at all. Now, this is extremely concerning, and it emphasises the barriers which many people face when attempting to isolate. The same research highlights that those from higher income households are far less likely to not isolate at all. So with 1 in 3 not fully isolating when requested, we need to do much more to support them. But there are concerning signs that the Scottish Government's £500 self-isolation support grant is not getting to everyone who needs it. Now, I warmly welcome the First Minister's announcement yesterday that the grant will be extended to those earning the accredited living wage and below. It was another step in the right direction and came after conditions were slightly widened last year to include those who meet criteria for the receipt of universal credit. But statistics from November show that just 1,200 of almost 4,000 applications for this grant were accepted, only 30%. The Scottish Government suggested this may be because of a high number of speculative applications, but we urgently need more clarity on this as the criteria are widened again. Can the Cabinet Secretary guarantee that applicants are not being wrongly refused? And after years of complaints from councils that the administration costs of the Scottish Welfare Fund are not being met by government, are councils being fully supported to administer the grants? And even if the speculative applications are the main reason for such a high rate of rejection, does this itself not indicate that there may be significant unmet need? The grant is means-tested, and means-tested social security payments almost always have a lower uptake than universal ones. Has the Scottish Government estimated how many people are entitled to the grant but were not claiming? And if not, then why not? Other countries with a far better track record of managing COVID are not scrimping on support. New Zealand offers the equivalent of about £315 a week, but regardless of income. Similar amounts on the same basis are paid in Taiwan, Singapore and South Korea, while Finland guarantees 100% of the person's lost income, again, regardless of individual circumstances. Last month, it emerged that a universal payment is the preferred option of the English Department for Health, and I would strongly encourage the Scottish Government to consider making the grant universal, or at the very least, increasing eligibility further. In the words of Dr. Chevik, who's a member of the Nerve Tag, you can't just expect people to sit at home with no money, no income, and then get £500 2 weeks later or 4 months later. The majority of people with COVID have mild symptoms and they will continue going to work if the alternative is that they lose their income. Now, as the motion states, there are also practical barriers to self-isolation. The self-isolation advice on NHS Inform advises those isolating to, and I quote, separate yourself from other people in your home and keep the door closed. If you can't stay in a separate room, try to stay 2 meters away from other people. If you can, use a separate bathroom from the rest of the household. Now, this is easy advice to follow if you live in a 4-bedroom house with plenty of space, but will prove difficult for many, not just those in temporary unsuitable accommodation, but for people in multi-generational households and small flats. Hotel accommodation must be offered to everyone who cannot practically follow the self-isolation guidelines in their own homes. And in May last year, my colleague Alison Johnston asked the First Minister, will accommodations such as hotel rooms be offered free to those who need them? Now, she replied, the short answer to that question is yes. However, an FOI request submitted by the Greens has revealed that of the 20 councils that responded so far, only 3 have provided hotel accommodation for self-isolation for a total of 7 people. 7 people. Now, this does beg the question about whether councils are receiving the support they need to offer isolation accommodation and whether it's being publicised widely enough. Now, in New York City, a supported isolation package is offered. This includes voluntary, free-of-charge stays at hotels with transport provided, food, medication, pet care and social care. Other countries that have had considerable success at tackling the virus have introduced similar packages. In South Korea, quarantined individuals are provided with daily necessities and sanitary kits. In Taiwan, individuals are offered financial compensation and support services, including daily follow-up calls, medical care, household services, and accommodation and meal delivery. Now, I note the reference in the Scottish Government amendment today that reference to the National Assistance Helpline, a local self-isolation assistance service, and I'd very much welcome more reporting from government on both the reach and effectiveness of these services, which I know council staff are working so hard to deliver in partnership with the third sector. But given the figures on accommodation that I've just quoted, I'm sure she will understand my concerns that we need to do everything that we possibly can to proactively support people to isolate. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Greens have repeatedly called for an elimination strategy for this virus. And I think that's still achievable, despite the very widespread community transmission that has taken place. Keeping the SARS virus pinned down will be the challenge going forward. And this can only happen through a robust contract tracing system, a supported isolation package, and a very dynamic vaccination programme. If we let any of these elements slip, then we will fail, and we cannot afford to fail ever again. Thank you.
I didn't hear you move the motion, Mr Ruskell.
Apologies, a little bit rusty. Can I move the motion, Deputy Presiding Officer?
Thank you very much. And I now call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to speak to and move the amendment 24029.2 for up to 6 minutes. Please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking the Scottish Greens for bringing this very important debate to the Chamber today. Because alongside vaccination and the testing programme, compliance with self-isolation is vital to ensuring that transmission of COVID-19 is reduced. So I would like to begin by recognising that self-isolation is difficult for many people, whether that's practically, financial or emotionally. But despite this hardship, the vast majority of people, when asked to do so, do comply. And it is important that we are clear on the facts on this. A recent University College London study on compliance with self-isolation across all 4 nations set out that 62% of people developing symptoms complied with the isolation period, and 80% of people who had been in contact with someone who had tested positive complied with the guidance. So whilst the latest research shows that rates of compliance are much higher than figures are often quoted, including in this chamber, we do still, of course, have more to do. We will continue to build on the substantial support available to people self-isolating to ensure that where someone needs help to self-isolate, they can access this. Presiding Officer, in October 2020, the Scottish Government commenced a number of support services to ensure that vital support is available should people need it. These services include the Self-Isolation Assistance Service, a proactive triage call service delivered by local authorities. Everyone who is contacted via Test and Protect is offered a call from their local authority to discuss all the support available, both financial and the wider support package. And indeed, this service can also be accessed by anyone by phoning the National Assistance Helpline. These services provide essential medication, access to food and groceries and access to local services. Many local authorities also offer wellbeing services such as newspaper delivery, befriending and dog walking. Local authority staff have made 91,000 calls to assess the needs of people that are self-isolating, and over 26,000 support referrals have been made to help those in need through these services from October to January. And I would like to extend my thanks to all the local authority staff who are delivering this vital support and confirm that the Scottish Government will be meeting the additional administration costs for this once agreed by COSLA. Now, I've heard some fantastic examples of the support being provided. The local authority staff who arranged delivery of breast milk from a new mother to the hospital, the call handler who supported a single mother so her daughter could celebrate her birthday with a cake, a card and a present, and a single person who, when food was delivered to them, then needed support to re-establish their electricity supply. Now, whilst recognising that local authorities understand the needs of the people in their area the best, I am keen to ensure that we enable the sharing of best practice in delivering these services. So to this end, we are reviewing the existing support services with local authorities to consider how to standardise the offer nationally. Where local authorities identify opportunities or a demand for a particular type of support, we will work to look at unlocking the existing resources to deliver this support to more people across the country. So for many people, though, it is the financial support that is vital to ensuring that they can afford to comply with a request to self-isolate. The TUC has today described the UK Government's statutory sick pay provision as paltry and called for a decent sick pay to be offered to those required to self-isolate. And I would echo this call very much. The UK's position on statutory sick pay is far less generous than many other countries. The purpose of the self-isolation support grant from the Scottish Government is to help low-income workers who cannot go to work as a result of self-isolation and who will lose income as a result. From February the 16th, the reach of this grant will be extended to workers in receipt of council tax reduction. The grant will also be available to those with caring responsibilities for someone over the age 16 who is asked to self-isolate, where the carer themselves fulfils the other eligibility criteria. And in addition, workers who earn the real living wage of £9.50 or less will be eligible for the grant. We will continue to work with COSLA to develop clear guidance on these changes for local authorities and people who have been asked to self-isolate from the 2nd of February onwards. However, I also recognise there is more to do to ensure that people self-isolating are aware of the support available to them should they need it. And to this end, this is why we will undertake a further national media campaign to promote the support available. Public Health Scotland officials have also revised communication materials used as part of the contact tracing service to be even more explicit that if you need support, it is there for you. Presiding Officer, if we wish to beat this virus, we must all play our part, whether that is self-isolating, going for a test or complying with restrictions. And I'm grateful to the many employers who have supported their employees who need to self-isolate. I'm mindful of the many challenges that businesses face at this time. However, it is clear that too many people feel unable to stay at home and self-isolate when required because of a fear of their employer not allowing them to be absent while self-isolating. People who are required to self-isolate but attend the place of work present a serious public health risk, and encouraging staff to attend work during their isolation period not only puts that business at risk of temporary closure from a potential outbreak, it puts the lives of other employees and their families at risk. By the end of February, all people contact traced will be asked if they would like a notification from Public Health Scotland to confirm that they are required to self-isolate and the dates for their self-isolation period. This notification will make clear to the employer that the person should not be attending the workplace and will ensure that people self-isolating are supported to stay at home. If I have
The Cabinet
time.
Secretary just finishing. She's over time.
My apologies. Presiding Officer, I hope this gives indeed a flavour of the support that is available from the Scottish Government. We are pleased to support Pauline McNeill's amendment, but cannot support Richard Hamilton's, as we have already extended the eligibility for the self-isolation grant, and I move the amendment in my name.
I now call on Rachel Hamilton to speak to and move Amendment 24029.3 for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In opening the debate today on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, I want to start by echoing the thanks expressed in the Green motion towards our hard-working NHS staff and others, notably our fantastic armed forces personnel and volunteers who have been really instrumental in the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine right across Scotland and the UK. I'm not supportive of the Green solutions, but pleased to be given the opportunity to discuss this subject. We are all aware that self-isolation is a crucial part of the prevention of the spread of this deadly virus. We have to break the cycle of transmission, particularly in community settings, to getting on top of the virus as part of a package of measures. As we learn of new variants, compliance must be improved and the barriers to self-isolation broken down. We know compliance varies hugely. Some studies say 62%, as quoted by Shirley-Anne Somerville, others 18%. Regardless, changing behaviour is key. In the week to January 24th, 4,249 people arrived in Scotland who were expected to quarantine just in case they were incubating the virus, compared to 9,868 living in Scotland who actually tested positive. Dr. Sevic, a virology expert at St Andrews University, says compliance is our weakest link. I want to make 3 main points in addressing the various issues covered in the Green Party's motion and look to ways which we improve the current circumstances. Firstly, this short debate surely cannot solve the problems we are facing, and neither can yesterday's announcement from the Scottish Government on an extension to eligibility thresholds for self-isolation grants, although we do welcome that. The Scottish Government must look at why people are not self-isolating. We know that financial concerns, insecure unemployment, caring responsibilities, unsuitable accommodation are all factors as to why someone may not choose to self-isolate. As part of measures to address these concerns, changes to statutory sick pay were welcome. We know that vulnerable communities such as BAME groups are less likely to partake in self-isolation due to poorer housing, anti-vaccination theories and possibly their economic situation. We need to see a more bespoke intervention to suit these communities rather than a universal approach. Enforcement can be a key tool in supporting adherence, but it is essential that any unintended consequences for inequalities are carefully looked at so that people without the appropriate resources to support self-isolation are not unfairly penalised. We know that some people break self-isolation because they have to go to the shops for food. Currently, students and low-income households in Scotland are supported through groceries and essential provision. However, other countries offer designated quarantine accommodation, providing food and supplies for those isolating, such as in Denmark. Secondly, we know that additional financial support is crucial and welcome changes to statutory sick pay eligibility if you cannot work because of coronavirus. However, we must look carefully at the Scottish Welfare Fund, which has not performed during this time in the greatest of needs. Of the 59.5 million Scottish Welfare Fund available in 2021, by the end of September 2020, only 18.9 million of this, some 32% of the cash available, had been spent. And through the Scottish Welfare Fund, the self-isolation support grant is administered. At the tail end of last year, we heard in the Social Security Committee how many people are unsuccessful in obtaining support. I agree with Mark Ruskell's concerns. Only 2,000 people receiving the self-isolation grant up until the end of November, with just under 7,000 people applying for the grant. Richard Gass of Rights Advice Scotland spoke of the poor success rate and that Glasgow City Council were receiving 250 applications for the grant per week, but were turning down 3/4 of them. If somebody doesn't meet the criteria for self-isolation grant, guidance states that they should be considered for a crisis grant, and we know that crisis grants are also not reaching those who need it either. Shirley-Anne Somerville sent a letter to local authorities back in March advising them that it should be possible to obtain the crisis grant more than 3 times a year. However, CPAG made it clear in committee that crisis grants are still being refused on the basis that somebody has already had 3 grants, with their exceptional circumstances being ignored. We know that 22 million additional funding has been earmarked to the Scottish Welfare Fund. So why are there so many people being turned away? These issues caused by the distribution in the Scottish Welfare Fund need to be sorted out, especially for people who are self-isolating. Thirdly, Presiding Officer, we know that there is a route out of this pandemic. However, I don't believe that the SNP have grasped the urgency of the situation. On Sunday, we saw the lowest daily figure of over just 9,000 vaccines administered, while other nations in the UK raced ahead. Our route map out of this relies on strong track and trace system, increased testing, but crucially efficient and rapid vaccination of our population. There must be more mass asymptomatic testing and support to get those mass vaccination centres up to 20,000 vaccines per day with the help of the British Army. Furthermore, the Scottish Government must... I certainly will. Tonight, we cannot support the SNP amendment, given it offers no new measures, just a tweak to improve self-isolation that hasn't already been announced. I'd like to work together, but I move the amendment in my name, and thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and I now call Pauline McNeill to speak to and move amendment 24029.1 for up to 5 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name. Scottish Labour are supporting the Green motion today because we agree with the basic principle that everyone should be able to afford to self-isolate. The pandemic has already caused astronomical levels of hardship, but in tackling the virus, the current system does not still go far enough. There are many low-paid workers who will struggle to afford to self-isolate despite earning above the real living wage. Many people face a choice between COVID compliance and financial devastation. Transmission only reduces if those who have the virus self-isolate and that those who have been identified as having been close to an infected person also isolate from everyone. But many people are nervous to download the Protect Scotland app as they don't want to be told to self-isolate if they've been with someone who has COVID, mainly because of financial reasons. After a year of disrupted work, people's finances are under enormous strain and many people feel they cannot afford to isolate. Dr. Wanda Wyporska of the Charity Equality Trust said people avoid testing for a range of reasons, as we've heard already, caring responsibilities or employment worries. And she said that some people said that they're not going to take the test because if they're told to isolate, they won't be able to work and therefore they won't be able to have their income. Initial data shows that there is a low take-up of COVID tests in the most deprived areas in the UK, along with higher levels of people testing positive. So we need to take stock if that has changed at all and trying to understand the pattern and what we must do to respond. So those with lower incomes have been the hardest hit by both the virus and the collateral damage of restrictions. It's obvious that test and trace will only reduce transmissions if infectious cases are able to isolate effectively. This is the biggest barrier. Recent research by the University College London found that only 43% of people who develop COVID symptoms say they had requested the test. And so what happened to the other 57%? This is the biggest study to date that we know of, and the lead author of the UCL study, Dr. Daisy Fancourt, said that the number of respondents who say they are not isolating for the recommended number of days is deeply concerning. She also said that the increased adherence to self-isolation rules among those with a higher income household suggest that many of those not isolating are breaking guidelines because of financial concerns. So more support does need to be put in place to allow people to isolate without fear of losing out financially. Without proper support to help those be able to isolate, there is an economic divide between those who have the means to stay at home and those that don't. And even if they actually want to do it, it's finances that can prevent them. Working class households are bearing the brunt of this divide already. The phrase that we're all in it together doesn't feel like it for many people. While some are paddling, others are waist deep. Less than a third of the population in Scotland have downloaded the Protect Scotland app. People who test positive for COVID-19 are given a randomly generated code to generate. When they alert close contacts, they also have the app to tell them that they should isolate. But fewer than half of those using the app who tested positive actually entered the code to alert others. So we clearly have more work to do here. I know that in England and Wales, they've added an update to the contract tracing system where people can apply for the £500 grant if there's a self-isolation direction. I note what Shirley-Anne Somerville said about upgrades to the app. It would be useful in summary if ministers could clarify whether we have a similar process here in Scotland. As far as I can establish, the Scottish Welfare Fund is something that is really important when it comes to self-isolation. There are issues around the lack of public awareness of the fund and inconsistency of awards. Last year, the Poverty and Inequality Commission found that the fund was underutilised during the initial period of the lockdown, April to June, and shockingly they found a massive underspend of 1.1 million in the period of 2019. So we can see how desperate things have become for a lot of people, and the latest figures show that less than 1/3 of people who apply for the self-isolation grant had their applications approved. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I think we all agree that asymptomatic testing is extremely important in tracking down the virus. So we must make it easier for people to isolate without undermining their own financial situation. And 1 in 3 people have coronavirus without displaying any symptoms. So we also need to target testing at people who cannot work at home during the lockdown. In conclusion, no one should pay the financial price of isolating from family, work and friends because they cannot afford to do this, stop the spread of the virus. And therefore, Scottish Labour supports the principle of the Green Motion that it should be principle universal right to be supported in order to isolate yourself, stop the spread of the virus. Thank you very much.
Now call Alex Cole-Hamilton for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to the Green Party for making time for this important debate today. We have some differences of opinion on universality, but I think it's important that we make it clear that nobody should be disadvantaged if they are forced to self-isolate. It's now been nearly a year since the first cases of COVID-19 were confirmed in Scotland. When I look back at that time, that threat seemed so very far away. Strange to think that just a year ago last week, I was asking the Cabinet Secretary for Health about repatriating British citizens from a Chinese city that I'd barely heard of. And today I learned that one of my closest friends has tested positive after sitting at her father's bedside, who died in an Edinburgh hospital of COVID on Friday. We had no idea just how much this pandemic would turn all of our lives upside down. Since then, coronavirus has dominated absolutely every aspect of the business of this chamber, and that's right. And the consideration of public health has come first, but its impact has been felt in all other portfolios and discussions, from justice to jobs and education to the environment. We haven't always agreed in this chamber on the right course of action, and sometimes that disagreement has been vehement, but that comes from a good place. That comes from a passion and a duty of care to the people we are all sent here to represent. The motion rightly refers in the top line about the government's vaccine rollout, and my frustration with that is a matter of public record. That's not the fault of clinicians, it's a centralised bottleneck. And I think we are starting to see improvement. I'm grateful of that. But I do want to restate a point that my leader, Willie Rennie, made at FMQs this afternoon, that we have a vaccine hub established in one of the most deprived areas of my constituency in Muirhouse. But everyone who lives within eyesight of it is going to be shipped to the EICC to get their vaccine. These are some of the administrative hurdles we really do need to identify. And to remedy. The motion also refers to the need for an effective test, trace and isolate programme. And, Presiding Officer, this need was urgent 6 months ago, then when the government's launch of Test and Protect proved to be many things, but I don't think effective was one of them. That being said, I do welcome the plans laid out by the First Minister yesterday to widen testing, asymptomatic testing in healthcare settings, and to launch community testing across mainland areas. And I think that we will see some reassurance given to teaching staff who are quite rightly anxious given the prevalence and the transmissibility of the new variant amongst young people, that they will have access to asymptomatic testing on a twice-weekly basis. These are unprecedented times, and that is absolutely manifest in our workload, in each of our inboxes and in our mailbags. Those have been queries about the restrictions, interpreting the guidance and the rules, and many COVID aspects of COVID-related casework. But for me, and I'm sure for you, by far the greatest amount of time has been spent helping those who have been faced with little or no support from government because they've slipped through various cracks in the firmament. I don't blame government for that. It's very difficult to have a catch-all provision at these difficult times, but there are many such cases. The toll that this has taken on them has been huge, and the stress and emotional burden of being unable to pay for the basics, not knowing how rent will be paid next month and how you'll keep up to a decent standard of living has been unbearable for so many of my constituents, as it has been for so many of yours. The virus is punishing enough without people having to choose between following the rules and being able to feed their families. So we do need it to make it easier for people to self-isolate. Presiding Officer, thanks to the broad shoulders of the UK economy, people have been able to access the furlough scheme, and I welcome the First Minister's announcement yesterday that that £500 self-isolation payment will be available to everyone on an income level below that of the real living wage. And as I close, Presiding Officer, I want to urge the Scottish Government to ensure that these new measures are robust and inclusive enough that no one who needs the support is entitled to support will be losing out. They will have a responsibility to ensure that support packages succeed where they have previously failed, because livelihoods of all of our constituents depend on them. And let's not lose sight of the recovery. The biggest thanks we can give to those working so hard to keep us safe throughout this pandemic is to do everything we can to fight it with a world-class test and trace, adequate support packages for individuals and businesses, and a vaccination programme that will allow those businesses to reopen, our economy to restart, and our schools to return. I think that a number of members have mentioned the very real proposition, as articulated by Jason Leach in the COVID committee last week, that COVID may be here to stay. We may have to learn to live around it. And that means making it safer and more convenient for people to observe the rules and to make sure that they are financially recompensed if they are required so to do. And to achieve all of that will require a spirit of partnership and cooperation in this chamber and outside of it, with people working together in the interests of everyone in all corners of Scotland. Thank you.
We'll now move on to the open debate, and speeches of no more than 4 minutes, please. Tom Arthur, followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to make a few brief remarks in this debate, and I want to begin by joining Mark Ruskell and colleagues from across the chamber and thanking our frontline health and social care workers, and particularly those who are working round the clock in some cases to be rolling out the vaccine programme. There is a huge amount I agree with in the Green Party motion, and I am instinctively favour universality in the delivery of benefits. So what I'm about to say, I qualify with that statement, because I think one of the challenges that we face in the fiscal support that we offer in Scotland is we have to operate within the limited resources that we have at our disposal. And so I think instinctively, when we are having to manage a crisis, an unpredictable crisis, there is a strong case for looking to make sure that we are targeting every single resource to where it is most needed. But I would certainly want to be in a position to move towards universality if that is something that we know is going to be fiscally sustainable. And I think the points that Mark Ruskell and indeed Alec Cole-Hamilton has just made about being cognizant that we are going to be living with COVID for the long term is so important. So making sure that our test and protect system is robust, because it will be with us for some time, and indeed that we are putting measures in place to support those who do have to self-isolate. This is not going to be something that is passing. This is going to be an issue that will occupy much of the next Parliament, just as it occupied all of our attention over the past 12 months. Several members have made comments about the link between poverty, deprivation and low income with prevalence of the virus, and I think all of us who have been forensically examining the Public Health Scotland COVID maps on a daily basis will be able to recognise, in viewing our own constituencies and regions, that very often the areas with the highest concentration of people who have tested positive are often these areas where we know that perhaps lower incomes are more prevalent in areas of increased multiple deprivation. So the fundamental point that was being made by Mark Ruskell about the need in which, in order to achieve elimination, and we have to be targeting these groups and making sure that support rate is there, I completely agree with. Some members have touched upon the vaccination programme. I think it's deeply regrettable the way in which this is being politicised. Right across these islands, we have to be rooting for each other. You know, the failure of one part of the UK is a failure for all of us in this fight against the virus. I think the Scottish Government have articulated a position which has been based upon initially depth rather than breadth, to use the term that the First Minister has used. But we have seen yesterday and today the pace of vaccinations picking up considerably, and I think it's likely that will accelerate. And I can understand the temptation in the weeks preceding an election campaign to look for an issue, to look for a wedged issue. And I can also understand the temptation. I can anticipate. I'll give away, but I anticipate what you're going
Alex
to say.
Cole-Hamilton.
I think that the member is belittling very real and genuine concerns offered in good faith by opposition parties who want the SNP to succeed on this. But frankly, you are not succeeding on this, and we want that to change.
Tom Arthur.
I would never doubt Mr Cole-Hamilton's sincerity, for which I know he's reputed across the chamber. However, I would perhaps question some of the motives of the UK Government when they are briefing about quantities of vaccines while insisting that the UK Government does not put that information into the public domain. And the reason I raise this issue is very straightforward, is because it creates uncertainty and worry amongst constituents. And I've had countless constituents get in touch with me who are reading newspaper headlines in the back of opposition attacks, who are worried. I phone, I reassure, and a day or two later they've had their vaccine and it's fine. So I would encourage members to please resist the temptation, or if you are going to raise the issue, to temper your language and to do so in a way that takes cognizance that there are a lot of very vulnerable people out there who are very worried, and we have a responsibility not to be needlessly spreading fear. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Patrick Harvey, please be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Others have begun with thanks, and I would like to echo one line in the government amendment, which is to thank those who have done the right thing by self-isolating as necessary. But I am certain that I'm not the only member in this chamber who, since the very beginning of this pandemic, has heard from constituents who are doing so despite very severe anxieties about the consequences for themselves, for their livelihoods and for their families. And we have a responsibility to recognise those anxieties and to address them. I've heard from constituents who have been made to work by their employer despite even having reported symptoms, being told not to use the Test and Protect app, being refused furlough, and told directly not to self-isolate. Turn up for work or you'll lose your job. Those are the kind of threats that people have. Even, never mind just the loss of pay during the self-isolation period, turn up for work or you won't get any more shifts at all. That's the kind of coercion that some constituents have reported throughout this whole saga. And I worry that this fear of coercion or reprisals by employers will only grow as the vaccine programme rolls out. Irresponsible employers will feel strengthened in this regard, and some employees will feel under greater pressure to take risks with their own health and with the public health. Most people do want to do the right thing, but they face barriers, and those barriers are about money, but they're not only about money. I want to mention some of the arguments in the STUC. The STUC have never, in my memory, taken a very simplistic jobs kind of approach. All jobs are good. They've recognised that quality of employment matters. Some jobs are secure, well rewarded, protected by legal workplace rights and by good practice by employers. Work of that kind is great for people's well-being, socially, physically, as well as economically. Bad jobs do the opposite. And as Roseanne Foyer told the Finance and Constitution Committee today, while giving evidence on the budget, the pandemic has shown more clearly than ever that bad work kills, including by creating barriers to self-isolation where necessary. And as I say, those barriers are financial. Those financial barriers may result from precarious work, insecure incomes, lack of employment rights, the low level of statutory sick pay, and the lack of eligibility for statutory sick pay. It is therefore absurd to remove any reference to the UK Government from the motion. But there are absolutely challenges within the devolved competence of the Scottish Government as well, because those barriers to self-isolation also exist in the form of living space, caring responsibilities, mental health, and much more. Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the fact that the First Minister acknowledges that issues like international travel should have been dealt with more firmly in the past, and we now are moving to a system of managed hotel quarantine. That's welcome, but overdue and necessary. So why should there be any less of a proactive approach for self-isolation of people who live here, who know they may have been exposed to the virus, who want to do the right thing, but need a bit of help? We need a much more proactive approach from both governments, and I would commend Mark Ruskell's motion to the Chamber.
Donald Cameron, followed by Mark Griffin. Excuse me, Mr. Cameron, we seem to have an issue with your sound. If you would just hold on a moment. Could you say hello to us, Mr. Cameron? No, we're still not hearing you. Right, I think what I'll do is I see that Mr. Coffey is in the chamber, so I think I'll ask Mr. Coffey to be the next contributor. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The financial support being provided to people who are self-isolating is really, really important, and it's much welcomed, I have no doubt. As usual, our SNP government is going further and as far as we can to help as many people as possible. Yesterday, as the Cabinet Secretary has said, we've extended the support to cover those on the real living wage or less. It now includes those who already depend on a council tax reduction, and also to those with caring responsibilities too, which I'm really pleased to see. There's also an extension to the timescale for applying for the support to try and help as many people as we can. All of this means we'll be able to reach another 200,000 people in Scotland. After the £500 grant was introduced in October, the Government was asked to include parents of children who had to self-isolate, and they did. We also reached out to support people who were not on universal credit, but who would qualify for it if they had applied. So we can see that the Government is doing as much as possible to try and help and to respond to circumstances as best we can. Now, can we do more and help more people? I hope if we can, we will. But I'm sure that the people of Scotland can see that our Government is stepping in to help our most vulnerable citizens who are having to self-isolate. One development that I think is interesting to note, Presiding Officer, is that the Protect Scotland app that many of us have seen on our mobile phones will shortly be updated so that people being notified to self-isolate through the app will get details of how to apply for the grant. As I understand it, that will also give them a certificate to authenticate their claim when they make the application to the local council, and that should help too. That's a really helpful and useful application of IT in these times. So well done once again to our software engineers for making that possible. Presiding Officer, I wanted to say a few words slightly away from the debate about money, and it's the issue of isolation itself. When we get through this awful time, as I know we will, I hope the Government will look back and examine the impact that self-isolation has had on our people and continue to try and provide support in some form or other. Let's not forget our shielders, many of whom have effectively been living in self-isolation since the start of this pandemic, nearly a year ago now. I'd like to share just one or two examples of the impact of isolation on my own family. It will probably be the same experience for other members in the Chamber and many families across Scotland. Take my own sister Helen, shielding and living at home with my niece Kerry, who's both special needs and disabled. Both of them have hardly been out of their house in 11 months. The impact on Kerry of not seeing any friends for such a long time is hard to imagine, and on Helen too, trying to cope with her own vulnerability while protecting Kerry is impossible to comprehend. My daughter Niamh, despite being healthy, has also spent much of last year in self-imposed isolation whilst trying to complete her masters at Stirling University because her boyfriend Seb is extremely vulnerable to the virus and has been shielding for a full calendar year. and to protect and help him, she decided to keep apart from her family in order to keep him safe. Last but not least, my own partner Jackie's dad, Jimmy Muir, aged 93, enjoying his life quietly at home at the start of the pandemic, but now confined to a care home as a result of isolation and lack of mobility. They will all probably be really annoyed with me for mentioning them, but to say I'm proud of them all is an understatement. Presiding Officer, the impact of self-isolation has been felt by many of our citizens, young and old, and it's much wider than we think. All I'm asking in closing is that we care enough to reach out to people, to ask them about their experience, to learn as much as we can about it, and to be prepared to keep offering help if it's needed as we recover from the pandemic. If we do that, on top of helping with grants wherever they're needed, we will have done some good and valuable work for the people of Scotland at this time of crisis. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go now to Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Officer. Notwithstanding the government's action to widen the entitlement criteria announced yesterday, I welcome today's debate and agree the self-isolation support grants should be universal, but also should be barrier-free. Today's motion recognises that there are many barriers to self-isolation, including financial concerns, insecure employment, unsuitable accommodation and caring responsibilities, which is what I want to focus on today. For the past 3 months, I've been consulting on a Members' Bill to set up a Scottish Employment Injuries Advisory Council. And I think there's a lot to resolve with the now devolved benefit, but in relation to COVID-19 and its long-term effects, I believe it should be an industrial disease where the illness is caught in the workplace. Key workers, NHS, social care, retail and transport workers all face a higher risk of getting COVID, getting it severely or coming into contact with someone who has. They can't work at home and some are more low paid than others. And if you take care workers, on paper this grant should work for them, but we know life isn't as simple as that. I was told through the Members' Bill process about care workers who have and continue to face barriers to self-isolation. Trade Unions Unite and GMB told me that many have been wary of getting tested, fearing the loss of income if they had to self-isolate because they wouldn't get sick pay. Low paid, many on universal credit, they also face stigma if they had been off as well. Others, like construction workers, face financial and potentially employment repercussions, pay lost and possibly work in an industry with a history of blacklisting. They too lose out from self-isolating or speaking up about being COVID safe. And if they're not on a means tested benefit, they wouldn't be eligible for this grant either. Presiding Officer, when the alert, the call or the text message comes in to self-isolate, then you have to drop everything instantly. And it's a devastating irony that those most at risk have to do the most to get help. Baked into the entitlement criteria are a multitude of barriers and paperwork requirements to accessing the support. And what is supposed to be, it is an emergency situation. Someone must locate and submit proof of qualifying benefits, a recent bank statement, get proof that they can't work from home, proof their earned income will fall before they can get any help. And instead of slashing the criteria, the government has simply changed the thresholds. They might also have a very different experience to a professional or a home worker to receiving that alert. Yet we'd all panic about having food in, medication in the cupboard, but many of us are lucky enough not to have to consider if there's enough cash in the bank to go and get that shopping before the grant is paid, credit or data on the phone to claim the grant, or to set up an online account and an online shop with an unfamiliar supermarket. The pandemic has accelerated the divisions in society and our workforce at a rapid rate. Key workers, furloughed workers, those working at home, we all have different experiences of being at risk of catching the virus, the risk of having to self-isolate, and whether that risk is born through our workplace. Presiding Officer, for the sake of those most likely to lose out from self-isolation, the government must drastically think harder about how it can remove the barriers to get this vital support. Thank you.
And I now call Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I hope you can hear me. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a horrific experience for many and in different ways. First and foremost, many have had to deal with the tragic deaths of family members and friends. Others have been at the front line of our NHS or in social care dealing with the devastating impact of the virus at first hand. But for those not directly affected by the infection itself, the virus has nevertheless had a debilitating and pernicious impact, especially when it comes to being unable to see any family or friends. A series of lockdowns designed to keep us safe and protect our NHS has had a significant and profound impact on many people's lives. But in particular, it has had an unintended impact on the mental health of the nation. And that is something we must not just recognise, but also act upon. Indeed, both lockdown and periods of self-isolation will affect people in different ways. And it is something that has scarcely been discussed during the course of this pandemic. So I commend Mark Ruskell for bringing forward this debate more generally, even if these benches cannot fully endorse the entirety of his motion. And I note also that it is an issue that Mark Ruskell has pursued tenaciously in the COVID-19 committee, which I have the honour to convene. It is plainly right that we support those who are most at risk from taking time off work to self-isolate, not just to ensure the efficacy of self-isolation as a means for preventing further spread of the virus, but also because self-isolation in and of itself can lead to significant anxiety, as many have pointed out already, not to mention the practical consequences it can also have. As the motion notes, self-isolation can have these unintended practical consequences. It can put people in precarious situations relating to their employment status and financial means, among other concerns. That is why it is right that both the UK and Scottish governments have similar schemes which offer £500 to those who are most in need, so that they can self-isolate with some financial stability and security. However, the Scottish Conservatives do have concerns about how the scheme has been managed in Scotland, with less than 1/3 of applications for the self-isolation grant being approved by the SNP government, according to the latest data available. And clearly, there are improvements to be made in ensuring such targeted support gets to those who need it most. Of course, this scheme is not the only way in which people have been supported during the pandemic, and it would be churlish not to recognise what the Scottish Government has done in this regard, but also schemes such as the UK Government's furlough scheme and the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, providing valuable income to those unable to work during the pandemic. The UK Government has also sought to support some of the most vulnerable people through additional money invested in the Universal Credit Programme and the easing of eligibility criteria to apply for universal credit. These are all positive interventions, but it is clear that more is needed to help those struggling with the pandemic and its effects. As I noted previously, there are real and legitimate concerns about the impact of self-isolation on people's mental health, especially at this time of year. In November, SAMH published a study which revealed that 50% of people said their mental health has been worse in the last few weeks than at the start of the coronavirus pandemic. And Age Scotland noted that the impact of loneliness increases the risk of stress, anxiety, and depression, and doubling the risk of dementia. So it's clear we must ensure that as many of these stressful factors related to self-isolation are mitigated as much as possible. In conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, we agree with the general thrust of the motion, but are also of the view the Scottish Government must do more to reduce the negative mental health impacts of self-isolation. It is clear that existing financial support schemes can play a part in achieving both of these aims, but only if such support is properly targeted to those who need it most. Thank you.
Mr Cameron's was the last of the open debate speeches. We now move to the closing speeches.
Argued contributions across the political divide. Could I also congratulate Mark Ruskell and the Scottish Green Party for their initiative in securing this afternoon's debate. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed tremendous strain and responsibility on all our hard-working frontline NHS and care workers. The vaccination programme, as well as being, of course, a triumph for British and the international, has required exceptional organisational and administrative expertise to roll out. But as the motion itself recognises, an effective test, trace and isolate regime will be needed not just immediately, but for some time in the future. The key issue in the debate, as far as I was concerned, is the variety of barriers to self-isolation, money worries, insecure employment and suitable accommodation, and of course, caring responsibilities. To be clear, self-isolation is a key and crucial element of COVID recovery strategy. If quarantine stroke self-isolation is not carried out effectively for all the reasons that I've just highlighted, then we are weakening one of the key pillars of the plan, which will, of course, put back COVID recovery and renewal and will extend lockdown restrictions for longer than it needs to be. Earlier this week, in reply to a question from Bob Doris, the Cabinet Secretary outlined how the Scottish Government is supporting people to self-isolate, and eligibility, as we've heard, for self-isolation support grant has been extended to those who earn the real living wage or lower. The contributions in the debate, I think, were extremely useful. If I can focus first on Mark Ruskell, who made the point that the vaccine is not a strategy in itself. He also quoted Jason Leach, which talked about we have to live with COVID for some years to come. We, of course, need a strong self-isolation strategy. And Mark Ruskell also quoted academic research, which suggested 38% of individuals were not isolating for the recommended days. The Cabinet Secretary talked about, we of course have more to do. If people need help, they can access it, and flagged up the National Assistance Service and the helpline. And I thought she gave a very good example of best practice when she talked about the delivery of fresh milk to a new mother. The key is sharing best practice. And Rachel Hamilton also thanked our frontline staff and also mentioned the military, which I think has worked extremely effectively in this current crisis. Polly McNeill, I think, made the point that everyone should be able to afford to self-isolate, and many have a choice between COVID compliance versus financial destruction. So isolation, she said, must work effectively, otherwise the test and trace will not be as effective as it could be, and more support is needed, particularly those who fall on the wrong side of the economic divide. And finally, as far as contributions are concerned, Alec Cole Hamilton made a very important point about welcoming the asymptomatic testing. And again, he mentioned the dilemma disadvantaged families have between following the rules and feeding families themselves. So in conclusion, President Officer, I'm conscious of time. As many speakers have testified, we need to discuss the broader economic and social context of child poverty in Scotland. Even before COVID, child poverty and socialisation were high and projected to rise. I hope that our amendment will be accepted across the board, which calls on the Scottish Government to make full use of Scotland's testing capacity to deliver mass asymptomatic testing. We need to keep the virus pinned down. Vaccination is an important, but so is test, trace and isolate, part of the mix. Together we can defeat this foe and then rebuild our economy and communities.
Thank you. Now Maurice Golden, please, up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the hard-working NHS staff who are doing all they can to keep us safe and protected during these unparalleled times. And with the vaccine programme now underway, once again they are working tirelessly to ensure the population is protected. Deputy Presiding Officer, the Greens are right to state that an effective test, trace and isolate regime will be needed now and in the future, particularly as we attempt to deal with the emergence of worrying new variants, a point made by Mark Ruskell. Donald Cameron also highlighted the mental health impact that many of our communities are struggling with at this time. Proactive support is needed to reach the most vulnerable people to enable compliance with self-isolation, a point well made by Shirley Ann Somerville and Polly McNeill, who also raised the issue that the app should be upgraded to improve access to support on it. And we believe that proactive support should be offered to all of those who need it, including those on low incomes. However, we cannot agree that support should be offered universally. There are many of us, including members in this chamber, who don't see any loss of income as a result of either self-isolating or taking time or off work as a result of a positive test. It would be far more effective to provide a comprehensive support scheme targeting at those who need it, rather than a blanket approach that will cover everyone, including those who don't need any support from the state to enable them to self-isolate. Presiding Officer, many people today have mentioned the vaccination programme, including my colleague Rachel Hamilton as well as Alex Cole-Hamilton, and I agree that an effective test, trace and isolate regime will complement the vaccine programme. In the last 24 hours, we are starting to hear positive news about the Oxford vaccine that virus transmission could be substantially reduced from the 22 days after the first jab. It is further evidence that the vaccination programme is the route out of this and the most effective way to significantly reduce the number of people who are required to self-isolate. Deputy Presiding Officer, it is imperative more than ever that the SNP handle the vaccine rollout successfully. Let me be clear, I desperately want the Scottish Government to succeed in this vaccine rollout. But no degree of SNP spin can compensate for their mishandling of the programme. The fact is there are hundreds of thousands of vaccine doses sitting in storage that are allocated to Scotland. And no degree of SNP spin can explain why we have fallen so far behind the rest of the UK in terms of administrating the vaccine. All 4 nations have equal access based on population share. There is no excuse. Last week, 2.4 million first doses of the vaccine were administered. Only 145,000 of those were in Scotland. Based on population share, that should have been 200,000. Deputy Presiding Officer, supporting all of those who need support to self-isolate is critical, but fixing the vaccine rollout programme is the surest and fastest way to protect the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you.
I call on Shirley Ann Somerville for up to 5 minutes. Please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank all members for the contributions that they've made in this very important debate, because we all appreciate and share an understanding that compliance continues to be critical and will be for some time. Only by self-isolating when we develop symptoms or are notified to do so can we break the chain of transmission of this virus and save lives. And we know that self-isolation is a significant challenge for people to undertake. And I've set out today the extensive range of support that is available to people self-isolating and their intention to expand that. Now, Mark Ruskell was quite right to challenge the government not just to think about this in the short term, but also for the long term as well. And I reassure him and commit that we are looking at the lessons we need to learn for the future on this. However, I'm afraid I can't agree with him on his aspect in the motion around the universal offer for everyone for self-isolation. That, according to our forecasting, would cost for the next financial year £700 million. And given the financial constraints that we are under, the Scottish Government believes that there are better ways to support people at this point. Can I urge Rachel Hamilton not to be using, once again, this 18% compliance figure, which is woefully out of date, not because it does a disservice to the government, but because it does a disservice to those who are taking the difficult choice to self-isolate, because compliance is high, as I said in my opening remarks. If we don't give people the correct picture, we give them a false picture, and that will damage the morale and damage compliance. So can we please use the most up-to-date figures on this, not for the government's benefit, but for the people out there who are listening to us and looking for leadership. Many members have quite rightly asked about the number of people who have been turned down and have not received a self-isolation support grant for this. This In passing, I would add, Presiding Officer, it does replicate roughly what is happening in England. I noted a report in The Guardian yesterday which said that 70% of people who apply are being refused. We are taking action to ensure that we are extending the eligibility, and therefore perhaps some of the people will be more eligible in the future than have been in the past. But I would also point out to some other reasons why people are not being eligible for a grant. That is people that have applied who have not been in work and therefore not receiving a drop in income, people who have not been self-isolating, and also a number of speculative applications. So we will look very seriously, and have been looking very seriously, at what we need to do around eligibility. That's why we made changes already and why we will continue to look at this. Pauline McNeill quite rightly talked about people that are frightened to come forward for a test because of a fear of self-isolating, and she's quite right to highlight this. That's why we are already looking at what we need to do around putting the information in about support in there when we're doing community testing, so that people are aware of what's out there. And again, I mentioned in my opening remarks about the publicity campaigns we will be doing in general. Certainly.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. If the Cabinet Secretary, as I'm sure she does, recognises that people do face threats of consequences from employers, coercion from employers, and have those fears, surely as hospitality and retail reopens, as the vaccine rolls out, we need more than just information for employees. We need a way of ensuring high level of good practice by employers. We need the stick, not just the carrot.
Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Thank you. And can I say to Patrick Harvey, I was just coming to his remarks earlier on, and indeed to this point, because he quite rightly raises the issues that some employees have been facing. And I know this is something that he has spoken about in the Chamber in the past. I mentioned some of the measures that we're looking to undertake in my opening remarks, but he should be reassured that we are looking at what more can be done, and I'm happy to work with him and with others on further details of that, because it is something that we are taking very seriously. He and others also spoke about isolation accommodation. Isolation accommodation guidance was developed with the Scottish Government in COSLA last summer. The feedback from those delivering the support is that whilst the service has been on offer for those that need it, there is very limited demand for that alternative accommodation. But we do keep this under review, and for example, we are looking at how we are offering support and making sure that's detailed enough so that people do actually understand that that's an offer that's out there. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I believe that we have a strong universal support package that's available to everyone in Scotland, plus taking targeted action for anyone on low income, less than the real living wage. We've got a strong package out there, but I am, of course, always willing to work across the Chamber to see what more can be done. It is our shared endeavour to tackle this virus, to support compliance, that we will see the best results from. Thank you.
Colin Mark-Ruskell to wind up the debate for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank members for their contributions and warm words this afternoon. And hopefully this has provided a strong spotlight on this aspect of our COVID response. And I look forward to taking some of that scrutiny forward, not just in this chamber, but through the COVID committee under Donald Cameron's convenership. It's right that we scrutinise this, because I don't think we've ever had a full picture about the effectiveness of self-isolation and the effectiveness of the services and the support that we're putting in place to help people to self-isolate. The Cabinet Secretary said quite rightly that 68% of people have managed to self-isolate, and yet that is a figure that in some way we can welcome. We can thank those people for the efforts that they've made. And it has been very difficult, particularly for people who've had to shield for a very long period of time. I think Willie Coffey's heartfelt contribution to this debate has shown just how hard it's been for carers in particular to go into self-isolation and to shield. But the flip side of this is the figure that I mentioned. It's the other half of that. It's the 32% who have been unable to self-isolate. And as Pauline McNeill said in the debate, there are people here who are paddling, but there are also people here who are waist deep and are really struggling. And I think there is an element of fear. There is an element of fear of people to self-isolate on what may happen in their workplace, what may happen if they lose income. Turning to the support package that has been developed by the Scottish Government and has evolved. So I think the local assistance service started just with working with those who are shielding, but now I think is more available to everybody who needs to self-isolate alongside a national helpline. I think we do need to see how effective this service is, and that's not to put any criticism onto the incredible work of council officers who are delivering these helplines alongside strong third sector partners. But we do need to ensure that there is consistency across the country, and we do need to ensure that the work of the local assistance services is actually getting through to the people that desperately need support. And again, I welcome the commitment from the Cabinet Secretary in conversation with COSLA to ensure that the administration costs of running this service are fully met, because I think all of us who've got contact with our local authority colleagues know just how hard council workers are having to work at the moment, and the stresses and strains that they're under. So that's an important point. But I think something is not quite happening with the accommodation side of things. I highlighted the incredibly low uptake of the accommodation offer earlier on in this debate. And I understand that in Edinburgh, some of the figures show that for those people who've been in touch with the local assistance service, only 1% of those people have recently gone on to then get further support. Now, I'm finding that difficult to understand, because I don't think that describes the inequality that exists in this city and the needs of people who are living in poverty and disadvantage. So I just have my doubts about whether this service, whether the support packages that we're putting in place are actually getting through to those people who desperately need it. I hope that I'm wrong, but I think we need to provide more scrutiny on this. The national media campaign, again, which the Cabinet Secretary mentioned, again, I think would be very welcome. I mean, I have constituents who are just genuinely unsure about what type of support they can get right now. I have virtually nobody who believes that they can get hotel accommodation through this, which in theory I think people can, but it's not really clear if you live in a two-bedroom flat and there's 3 or 4 of you living in that property, whether you can actually get hotel accommodation or not. So I think there's something there about the messaging. I think there are some barriers as well that have been mentioned in this debate about accessing the grant. There has been up to now only a 10-day window, which means that some people, if they've been ill, they've missed that 10-day window, and then they've then been turned down for the grant. So I think the extension to 28 days makes a lot of sense. But there's also an element of digital exclusion here as well. I mean, Mark Griffin mentioned this, and Citizens Advice Scotland have been discussing this as well, where, if those people are self-isolating, they can't actually get outside the house, then you kind of need a computer or an iPhone or whatever to then actually send in the evidence that you need to apply for this grant. Every time we do that, we put up a barrier. Every time we do that, we make it harder. Have I got a minute left, Deputy President? Yes, I've got a minute left. Employers. Mark Griffin and Patrick Harvey spoke about irresponsible employers, and the STUC are right. Bad work kills, and it kills every single day, but it kills even more in a pandemic where employers, bad employers, are implying threats to their workforce, which then means that they are unable to do the right thing. But I do want to reflect on good employers. There's a good employer, very good employer near where I stay in Stirling called Recyclebike. They're a social enterprise. They don't have as much income coming in as they would like to pay beyond statutory sick pay. But they're also in a business which is difficult because the work cannot be done at home. So they've been calling repeatedly to me to see these eligibility criteria extended to the real living wage, but beyond the real living wage, so it can capture more of their staff and they can get the support that they need. And they don't need to choose between isolating or eating. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, progress has been made this week. I absolutely welcome that. The increase in eligibility effectively to another 200,000 people in Scotland is really welcome progress. But there's a lot more people in Scotland today than 200,000 people who are in work poverty. And that's where we need to focus. We need for them to put in place the most robust package possible in the world to ensure they can isolate when they need to and do the right thing, and to be supported in doing that. Thank you.
That concludes the Green Party debate on universal support for self-isolation. We'll shortly move on to the next item of business.